Hey guys, it's Kesara, and today I'm going to be doing my February TBR. So 2022 for me is going to be all about getting back to my roots of reading fantasy. So when I put together my February TBR, I had to actually shorten it quite a bit just because the number of pages that I ended up putting for me to read in February was just way too much. Like there were just way too many books that I really wanted to get to that it's just not going to work out. So there are a lot of books and series in this TBR that like if I get into it, I might just binge read that whole series because I have a feeling that's probably what's gonna happen with some of these. And there's a lot of books that I've been wanting to read forever. But I also felt like I had to cut the fantasy a little bit, throw in some like romance fantasy in there and some sci-fi because I like some good sci-fi sometimes. There's a little bit of humorous sci-fi, there's a little bit of more hard-hitting sci-fi, there's a lot of fantasy, and maybe some easier to read fantasy as well. I'm really excited for this TBR. I also cut it down to 7 books instead of 8 because normally I would put 8 books on a TBR, but because of the number of pages, some of these books are pretty epic. I decided to keep it at 7, and because there's a lot of books in series that I really do feel like probably gonna end up reading second and third books in series that aren't on this TBR, but just because I'm in the mood to read them after reading the previous book in that series. February should be a really fun month because I'm gonna have a lot of free time, a lot more free time than I was expecting to have in February, and it is super cold right now, even though it's Florida. Like we went down to freezing, or at least close to freezing, so I'm staying indoors as much as possible, and I'm really excited to get to some of these books. So the first book that I want to talk about is The Alloy of Law by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the first book in the second Mistborn trilogy, which I picked up a long time ago, like when this first came out. I think it was in 2012. When did this book come out? 2011. So this book came out in 2011. I'm pretty sure I picked this up in 2012 though, but I don't remember if I read it or not. Goodreads says I did read it, like it's marked as read on my Goodreads, but I thought I DNF'd it, and like if I look, there is a bookmark in here, so I'm guessing that I did DNF it and then marked it as read on Goodreads. This was a big disappointment for me when I first picked it up back in 2012, but then again, I had a lot of issues that year just in reading in general, so I feel like it's time to get back to it. I recently reread the Mistborn trilogy, I want to say in 2020, a year ago. I think it's finally time for me to move on to the rest of the Mistborn series. They just announced that there's going to be another series after this one, and then there's a 7th book in the series coming out this year. So I'm just like, why haven't I read this series yet? This is one of my favorites of all time. Like Mistborn is one of my favorites of all time. How have I not read the second trilogy yet? So it's time. I do know that it's not anything like the first one, so I'm not expecting going into it that it's going to be anything like the first series, but I'm hoping that I'll end up really loving it. I do have the other 2 books in the series, Shadows of Self and Bands of Mourning, so if I finish The Alloy of Law, I could just binge read the series, but I'm not going to put these 2 on my TBR just in case I don't get to them. So far, only The Alloy of Law is on my TBR, but I do think there is a high possibility that I'll get to the other 2 books. Also, I'm kind of into Brandon Sanderson right now because I'm currently reading Cytonic, which I'm hoping that I'll finish this week so that it'll be on my wrap-up for next week when that video comes out. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in that video, but because of that, I'm just like, there are still Brandon Sanderson books that I haven't read and I don't know how. So I think I'm gonna finally get back to this. Also, one of my goals this year is to read more fantasy, and I kind of made that in an attempt to read more new fantasy authors, which Brandon Sanderson is obviously not a new author to me, but like this is a series that I should have read a long time ago. Like honestly, I really should have. So I'm really excited to get back to it. So the next book that I'd like to talk about is Court by Tracy Wolff. So this book is the 4th book in the Crave series, and it's actually a new release on February 1st. So I'm excited to get to it, one, because I'm currently reading Covet, which is the 3rd book in that series. I'm kind of binge reading the series right now because I was like in the middle of Crush at the beginning of January, and I picked it up and like got super into it in like a guilty pleasure sort of way. Like the series is super predictable, but like in the best way possible where you like can't stop reading. I'm very close to ending Covet, so I feel like since it's coming out on February 1st, I'll have access to it next week, like pretty much right away. So I'm pretty sure Court is going to be a book that I pick up like pretty early on in the month of February, and I'm really excited for it. Mostly just because like I'm actively reading that series right now. I'll definitely get to a lot of these other books later on in the month, but this is one of the ones that I will be getting to as soon as possible, and I'm really excited for it. I won't say this is like a new favorite series of mine just because it's definitely a guilty pleasure series. Like, I really enjoy the romance for like the drama side of it, even though like it's a little too dramatic at times, and a lot of times I'm just like yelling at the main character because I'm just like, why are you being so stupid right now? But then it also has some really cool fantasy sort of paranormal plot, uses a lot of like familiar tropes that it just makes the series really easy to read, and it's just a fun, easy series to read that like gets your mind off of everything else. So I'm enjoying this. I don't think I would give any of the books in the series so far more than 4 stars. Like, probably most of them are going to be in the 3-star range for me, but just because a series is not one of my favorites doesn't mean that it's not highly entertaining, and I like the unique twist that the series has, so I'm excited to see what happens in the most recent volume. So the next book that I want to talk about is a book that I kind of decided to pick up on a complete whim, because it's not like one of my like most anticipated releases or like part of my goals or anything like that. Like, my only goal that I put for 2022 is to get back to my roots and read more fantasy, but this is a sci-fi book, so I feel like sci-fi and fantasy are very interrelated, and I've always wanted to get more into sci-fi, and this one's really popular, and I've read a book by this author before that I really liked, so I really want to get to Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So I picked up The Martian like a while ago. One of the things I really liked about The Martian is, one, it's an ultimate survivor story, but also it's like a hard science sci-fi. Like, all of the ideas and things that it portrays, I feel like it could really happen in my lifetime. It's not like kind of way out there sci-fi. It's very soon, like, these sort of things could be happening. Maybe not exactly the same things, but it's a very realistic sort of sci-fi, and I like that about it. And also, he's very funny, and I like the way he writes his characters. I've heard Project Hail Mary and Artemis, his other 2 books, are very similar to The Martian, which is why I haven't picked them up yet, but I've heard really, really good things about Project Hail Mary. The only reason I haven't picked it up yet is because I didn't really have access to it other than the ebook, which I don't love ebooks. Like, I just really don't. And for a book like this, where it's like more of like the humorous sort of sci-fi book, I feel like it's just really great on audio. So I just decided to indulge because my Audible subscription renews in March, so I figured might as well use up some of those credits. So I got Project Hail Mary, and I'm really excited for it. Hopefully I'll end up loving it. I've heard only good things about it, so I'm hoping that I'm gonna end up loving it. And I honestly don't mind if it's that much like The Martian, because I love The Martian, but I'm sure it has a different twist to it. So I'm excited for this, and I'll probably get to this one pretty soon because it is very different than most of the other books on my TBR. So it'll definitely be a good cut away from the more like epic fantasy books that I have on this TBR. So the next book that I'm hoping to get to in the month of February is The Obelisk by N.K. Jemisin. So this book was on my series to finish in 2022, which I posted last week. I just need to get back to it. Like, this is a book that I started multiple times and just like kept getting distracted by other things. And I feel like this month is one that I probably won't get distracted by because there's not that many new releases or anything that I'm looking forward to. And I have a lot more free time in February than I was expecting. It's gonna be a great month. I'm really excited for it. So I feel like it's finally time to get back to this series. And I still have the first book in this series pretty fresh in my mind from my reread last year. So I think it's time to get to this one. I absolutely love the world that the series is set in because it's a post-apocalyptic, like, high fantasy world where they have like earth magic, which is just great. The structure of the way the writing was done in the first book is fantastic. So I'm excited to see how it's done in this book as well. I did really like the audiobook of the first one, so I'm planning to listen to the audiobook of this one or switch between the audio and the physical book because obviously I have a copy of the physical book, but I don't have access to the audiobook yet. I have it on hold at my library and it says 3 weeks, which usually comes sooner than whatever it's estimated, so I'm hoping that I'm gonna get it sooner, but if not, 3 weeks is still in the middle of February. Like, it'll just be towards the end, so I'm hoping to get to this one before the end of February, and if I do, I could potentially binge read the next book in the series as well, but because it is so far out, I seriously doubt that I'm gonna get to The Stone Sky in February, but I definitely plan to get The Obelisk because the ending of the 5th season definitely makes you want to pick up the next book in the series, and I just don't know why I haven't yet. So it's time to finally get to all of those series that I just haven't been able to move on with, and this is definitely one of them that I'm hoping to get to as soon as possible. So the next book that I absolutely will be getting to in the month of February is Mind of My Mind by Octavia E. Butler. Octavia E. Butler is just absolutely fantastic. It's one of my goals to read all of the books that she's ever written, and I'm currently on her Seed to Harvest series. This is the second book chronologically in that series, and I'm really excited for it. So there's 4 books in the series. I read the first one, which was Wild Seed, so it's time for Mind of My Mind. I do plan on getting the other 2 books in the series this month, so if I get them and I really like this one, there's a good chance I might continue on with those books as well, but I'm not sure. These are pretty short though. I just like eat up up her books. Like, I read them so quickly. She is just one of the most creative and unique science fiction authors that I've ever read. And so far, I really enjoyed this series. The first book is following like two gods, and it's kind of this like really epic in scope, like time-wise novel. So I'm excited to see where this one's going, because the way Butler writes, she tends to write like in series, but like different generations. And that's what I've heard. Like, this one is like each book is set like in a different time period, sort of. I'm not sure exactly. I honestly don't know. I like to go into her books kind of blind, but I'm really excited for this. Like, really excited for this. And hopefully I'll end up loving it and getting to the other books in the series, because all of her books are awesome. And I think this is my last series by her I have. I think after I finish this series, all I have is Fledgling, which is like her vampire novel, because every sci-fi author has to have a vampire novel, of course. So I'll probably get to that one later this year as well, but this one I will definitely be getting to in February, and hopefully I'll end up loving it as much as I have all of her other books. The next book that I plan to pick up in the month of February is a new release, and that's House of Breath and Sky by Sarah J. Maas. I don't know if I'm gonna pick this up like as soon as it comes out or later on in the month, but I'll definitely get to it at some point in the month of February. So this is the sequel to House of Earth and Blood, which I actually enjoyed quite a bit, more than I was expecting to. While I don't love the characters as much as I do some of these authors' other characters in other series, I do think there's a high potential for me to really like this series, just because I generally don't like the first book in her series, and I actually really enjoyed the first book in this series. House of Earth and Blood was very fast paced. It really kept me invested in the story, and I liked the way the world building was done, even though I generally don't like it when world building is done that way. But for some reason, when Sarah J. Maas does urban sort of fantasy, it gives me more of a high fantasy feel, like just the way she writes, and because of that, I end up liking it more than your typical paranormal open fantasy sort of romance. So because of that, I am enjoying the series so far, so I'm excited to see where the next book goes, and I have a feeling the next book is going to go in a direction that I'm really excited for. This is another one of those that's kind of like a guilty pleasure series for me, but I'm hoping that it's a little bit better than the first one, because I think I gave the first one 3.5 stars, so not amazing, but I think this one has the potential of being better than that. One of my main issues with the first one was just like the consequences were not there, which was the same issue that I had with her Court of Thorns and Roses series. So I'm not expecting too much out of it, but I think it'll definitely be a fun read. And the last book that I want to get to in the month of February is a reread, and this is from my series that I need to finish in 2022, or at least continue on with in 2022, and that's Gardens of the Moon by Stephen Erickson. It doesn't look like a long book, but it's like 600 something pages, so it is still a pretty long book. It's actually not the length that intimidates me, it's just the content is, it's a very epic series, and the author does not really explain things when you're going into it. Even so, I really love this. This is one of those books that I'm really gonna try to read physically and not too much on audio. I might like sit with the physical book and listen to the audiobook and follow along, just because I really love the audiobooks. The audiobooks for this series are absolutely fantastic. But Maleficent Book of the Fallen is a series that has been on my list to read basically since high school, and I just haven't gotten around to it. I've heard such great things about the series. I've read the first two books and loved them, so it's finally time for me to get back to them, especially since I'm gonna have a lot of free time in February. I feel like this is a really great one to get to. I'm also hoping that I can get to Dead House Gates as well, just because I have read both of these, so I think rereading them will be a little bit faster, so that in March I can get to some of the books that I haven't read in the series yet. But for now, I'm just putting Gardens of the Moon on my TBR, because this is the one that I absolutely want to get done. If I don't get done anything else, this is the book that I'm going to get done in February, and I'm really excited about it. I really enjoyed this the first time around, so hopefully I'm going to enjoy the reread of it as well. So that's all I have for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. I post videos on Tuesdays and Saturdays, so consider subscribing. And if you'd like to be notified as soon as I upload, you can click that little bell icon. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up to support my channel. All social media links are in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!